Hey, everybody, welcome back to the A Better Computer podcast. And today we're talking about App Store fees and what merchants pay to process transactions. And I started thinking about this over a month ago when Google announced some changes to how they're doing payments. Effectively, they had a pretty similar rule to Apple, where if you're distributing your app through the Play Store, you need to use Google's payment system, and Google would take a cut, typically 30%, although they did have programs to have lower amounts. Now, basically what they're doing is, I actually have a draft of a blog post I'm working on here to talk about it. But basically now everyone is charged 15 to 20% for payments taken through apps sold on the Play Store or distributed on the Play Store. And if you use Google's payment method, they're going to charge you 5% on top of that. And if you use a third-party payment system, Google's not collecting anything. You're going to pay whatever fees you pay to that company. But Google will still be collecting 15 to 20% of those transactions. So this got me thinking about my opinion on how in-app purchases are done and how much Apple gets specifically, because that's the world I focus on. How much do they get to keep of all this hard-earned money that developers are earning from customers? How much are they keeping? And I've always thought that this was too high. So if we kind of do a quick breakdown, I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this podcast know the deal, but effectively, if I'm selling a $10 product on the App Store, the default rules are Apple keeps 30% of that as kind of their processing fees, as their services for developing Xcode, developing the platform, developing the App Store and everything. 30% is what they keep. So on that $10 thing that you buy, I, the developer, keep $7, right? It's, without some context, that's hard to say how good or bad that is. In the world of traditional retail, it's pretty good. In the world of online distribution, it's pretty bad. So, this is the core of the controversy around it and why not everybody agrees. Apple did a few years ago implement a small business program, which made it so that if you're earning less than $1 million per year on the App Store, which is most developers, then the ratio, you have to apply for this and get approved for it. I am in this program, for example. Apple keeps 15% of the payments that you accept. So on that $10 thing that you buy from me, in this case, I'll keep $8.50. So definitely a lot better. And at scale, once you start doing a good amount of business, those numbers add up. That's meaningful additional revenue in your pocket. Now, if you're selling something on the web, things get a little different, because on the web, you can go direct to your customer. You can just sell something on your website. And so that's a lot easier. And in general, there's going to be exceptions here where you can get even lower rates. But in general, if you're selling direct to someone online, you're going to be on a 2.9% plus 30 cents per transaction deal, which is basically on that $10 item, I'm going to pay a flat 30-cent fee for just doing the transaction plus 2.9% of whatever the total of that transaction was. So in this case, another 29 cents. So if I'm selling a $10 thing to you online and I'm handling the checkout on my own, I'm not using any sort of distribution method. I have a website. You buy it from my website. I get to keep some money. In that case, I will keep on a $10 thing you buy, I'll keep $9.41, which nice for an Apple fan. If you know, you know. And that's kind of the thing, is developers and companies who sell things online direct to consumers see on that $10 thing, they're keeping $9.41 on their website. But when they sell the exact same thing on the App Store, especially if they're a big company, they're only keeping $7. And that's a big difference. And that's one of the reasons why you see these like life hacks people find where they're like, if you're subscribing to YouTube Premium or something like that, do it on the website. Don't do it in the app, because in the app, it's more expensive. They're trying to cheat you in the app. And it's not necessarily that they're trying to cheat you. It's that their margins are significantly lower when they sell it through Apple's store compared to when they sell it directly to you online. And I should also say that 2.9% and 30 cents, that's what like a nobody gets. That's what's like someone like me would get if I go to a payment processor and I'm just like, I need to do payments. That's what I'm going to get. But if you're a big company, you can negotiate this down. And I happen to work in payments, so I know more about this than the average person, but effectively, there are incentives that the card brands have, like Visa and MasterCard especially have incentives that merchants can use to reduce their rates. They can provide additional data points to like improve the validity of the transaction. And there's some other things they can do to try to get that rate down, as well as just having enormous volume gets you better deals. So there are companies out there whose sole purpose is to get merchants this 2.9% to get it down a tenth of a cent or a tenth of a percent. And that's going to be like a meaningful difference to their financials. So that 2.9 is kind of the ceiling, and people try desperately to get that down as low as they can to just try to have better rates. So anyway, that's the state of things. If you sell online direct to customers, you're going to keep like 94% of it in a $10 sale. If you are selling through Apple and you're a big company, you're only going to keep $7. That's a big difference. So is Apple bringing value there? And before I was actively releasing apps on the App Store and selling things through the App Store, I was of the pretty strong opinion that the 30% and even the 15% were pretty outrageous, because I was looking at those numbers and I was like, it's crazy how much of a difference there is, how much a merchant can save by selling direct to the customer and not involving Apple. And they should be able to do that. Like, it's absurd that we don't have this competition. And after becoming a developer more seriously and selling more things and kind of getting more experience with this, I would say my position has shifted in some ways, but stayed the same in others. So basically, I have more of an appreciation now for Apple's cut. I do think that they bring real value. App Store Connect is nice. It has problems, but like in general, it is a nice portal to manage everything, to just kind of go through all that. They've obviously created quite a bit of tooling to make sure that it's easy-ish to develop apps. And the payment stuff that they offer, I think actually is quite valuable. So I have a bunch of apps, and basically all of them have at least one in-app purchase, whether it be a subscription or a one-time payment. And I have tried. I actually, for my app Chapterize, I was actually considering distributing that directly to consumers on the Mac. I was planning on having the iPhone and iPad version on the App Store because I have no other choice. But on the Mac, I was thinking, hey, why don't I try selling this direct to consumers? And I went down that road and I tried to figure out like how that would work. And it wasn't horrible, but it was certainly more complicated than if I just went through the App Store. See, a couple of the things that were more complicated were payments were more complicated. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but I did have to set up my own payments. I had to set up my own logic to make sure that I was properly checking subscription statuses and that sort of thing, and like lining up customers in my payments dashboard with the customers using the app and making sure those didn't get out of sync. I had to make sure I managed things across multiple devices. So if you had like multiple Macs, you could use it on those multiple Macs. And then I had to maybe do a sign-in system. I had to figure all that out. And then on the updates front, again, not impossible, not hard, but I had to implement something like Sparkle, which would let me effectively link that up to my GitHub account, so that when I pushed a new release, that got picked up by Sparkle and it did an update. And again, these things are all possible. And I'm still working on kind of an app or two in the background that might use these in the future, because they're literally not possible on the App Store. But it's more work. It's more complicated. It's really nice, actually, for me to use Apple's payment system, where I can just very easily, without using any third-party tools, just ask for a payment, or I can check the subscription status of someone who's using the app, and I can use their Apple account. I don't get to see their Apple account, but I can basically ask iOS or macOS to check the user's subscription status and see if it's active or not. And that's it. I don't need to know anything. I don't need to sync databases. I don't need to have any like third-party services. I just ask the system, hey, have they paid for this? And Apple's like, yes, they have, or no, they haven't. And then I update the UI accordingly. That's really, really nice, really easy. And then on the update front, I literally don't think about updates, really. I did have to think about one update when I did my Quick Reviews 2.0 update, because I switched the data model. So I had to do a migration there, which was still to this day, I think, the hardest actually update I've ever done. But I did pull it off, I think. That was months ago, very few complaints, so that's good. But yeah, updates are just like not a thing I really have to think about. I just make a release, I upload it to App Store Connect, Apple reviews it, usually approves it relatively quickly. Sometimes it takes a while. I have annoyances there, but in general, it works. And when I'm ready to, and then I can just keep working. And then once I'm at a place where I think, oh, this is the next release, I just build that version, I upload that to App Store Connect, and we do the process again. And then people see in the App Store an update to their app. And that's just easy. So on iOS and iPadOS, I have no choice. I go through this system. But on macOS, I have continued to distribute the apps through the App Store because it's just easier. And again, because these are universal apps it's literally the same code shipping to iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. I already did the work, so why do it again, right? So for me, as someone who's a small business, so I'm taking home 85% of the payments that are made. The annoyance and extra work of managing additional systems and putting them into my app aren't necessarily worth it to me for the additional revenue I would receive. It's much easier for me just to use Apple's system, and it's easy to use. So that does not mean that's right for everybody. There are plenty of people who would love, plenty of companies who would love to be able to take payments the same way they do everywhere else. For me, again, another thing that's kind of nice about going through the App Store is that effectively all the money I'm making on software, literally all the money I'm making on software actually right now, is through apps in the App Store. So that's all one payout that's coming to me. It's one tax document. That's nice and easy. For people like Google and for these other companies, like a ton of other companies, especially bigger companies, they are using a payment system already because they're selling things direct to customers online. They're selling through maybe other platforms. And for them, they already have the infrastructure in place to like do authentication for users and to match up their payments. And they have tax documents running through a separate company that's doing payments for them. And for them, it would be really convenient to just use what they're already using in their iPhone, iPad, and Mac apps. And on the Mac, of course, they can do this, but on the iPhone and iPad, they can't. And so I guess my current opinion on how this should work is effectively this. I think that distributing your app on the App Store brings pretty real value. I think there is real value Apple's bringing there, and I do buy into their argument that they have made in court that they bring value. Their platform brings value, their storefront brings value. I agree with that. I don't think the marketing aspect is really there anymore in the way it used to be, but in terms of just, again, what I talked about with payments and updates and that sort of thing, like they handle it quite well. However, I do think that alternate app stores should be allowed because I think competition is necessary. I think that while I do feel more positive about Apple's fees, especially for small developers like me, where the convenience is worth it to pay them 15% of my transactions, I don't think that's worth it for everybody. And there are rules in Apple's App Store that just restrict the types of apps that can be made. So if you make, for example, Xbox Game Pass, literally not allowed. Netflix is doing some weird stuff with their game stuff to make it work, but like there are types of apps that are not allowed. You see this recently with some of the like vibe coding apps and that sort of stuff that is very popular. Apple is either removing them from the store or slow rolling their updates, and like stuff's going on. Apple has too much control, I feel, on what sort of software is allowed to exist beyond just the payment like breakdown. And so I think there should be alternate app stores available to users to install if they want. And those app stores can have their own rules. They can have their own payment details, and like all that can happen. That should be fine. That should be allowed. I also think that would introduce competition. Obviously, Apple, by being Apple and being the platform owner, they have an advantage. They're the default. The App Store is going to be there from day one. And that's an advantage they can have. And so there's a bunch of reasons why pricing software is irrational, and it's not necessarily on like the raw materials. It's about the value you provide. It's about the competition you have. It's about the platform advantages you have. And for Apple, their App Store is still going to be the default. Everyone's still there. They have momentum. The App Store has been around it'll be 20 years next year. Like it's been around forever. There's tons of momentum. They will be fine. But if there's these alternate App Store options, they can offer more compelling pricing. They can try to offer a better experience. They can try to offer a better developer experience. And if they can, then they're either going to steal market share from Apple, and that's going to push Apple to make theirs better, right? That's how you get improvements. You have competition, and with no competition, I think that it makes it so that Apple can be complacent to the point where the only thing that's going to make them change is regulatory pressure. And there are people who don't like that the government gets involved. But when you have no competition, what are you going to do? So that's the thing. I think alternate app stores should be allowed. And the other thing is, this is not a thing everybody agrees with. I think if you are a user who owns a phone, if you own a computer, which I consider the smartphone, the tablets, like all those are general purpose computers, I think you should be able to install whatever you want on it. I think I should be able to go to GitHub and download an app and install it on my iPhone. I think that anyone should be able to do that if they want. And there should be safeguards in place. There should be warnings to make sure that the user knows what they're doing. There should be something like Gatekeeper, which is on Mac OS, which helps Apple shut down apps that are like truly egregious. And I think they've done a good job with over the years of not abusing that power. I think they have, I forget the exact example, but I think they have gotten a little spicy with that in the EU with their Gatekeeper equivalent there. But anyway, I think that I should be able to install apps on my phone that didn't come from any app store, that just came directly from a user, right? And so I think that should be possible. Add protections, do whatever you need to do to make sure that users don't get themselves into too much trouble with this, but it's my device. I think I should be able to do that. So those are kind of the things that I feel like today. I agree. Apple can have an app store, they can have the rules they want, and they can charge the amounts they're charging right now because I do think they bring value. I also think alternate app stores should be allowed so that there can be competition and that if there are better experiences, those can be delivered to users. And if they're outside of the App Store, I think people should be able to install whatever software they want on their device because it's their device. Legally, maybe there's like fine print that says, no, it's not really your device, but I feel like the Mac model is the model, and I really would love it if all of our computers had this sort of model. So that's it for me today. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.